Hi, and welcome to Devotions with Pastor Joe. As we spend a bit of time this week talking about prayer, and we're focusing this week on the Lord's Prayer, which is probably pretty familiar to you, but let's maybe say it together today as we remind ourselves of these things. In Matthew chapter 6, he says, "Pray then like this, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." So we're looking at the different elements. And the first thing we saw was that when we come to the Lord in prayer, the first thing we're supposed to do is worship. We're supposed to express our love for God, our devotion to God, our admiration of God, and that lifts our faith. Now, the second thing that Jesus said, before you get into asking for things for yourself, which is normally what we think prayer is for, pray about your needs, pray about your concerns. It's all very true. But first, Jesus says we have to come to a place where we are acknowledging God's will for our lives. Here's a very fundamental thing. We should not be asking for our will. We should always be asking for God's will. First of all, before you start thinking, but then I won't get what I want, what you want is nowhere near as good as what God wants for you. God is so much better at planning your life and bringing about goodness that you would be foolish to swap what you desire for God's desire. But it's also a recognition that we are not really in control of the universe and all of its surroundings. We're far more limited than that. And it doesn't help our faith if we're constantly asking for things that we have no certainty about. In the scriptures, in 1 John chapter 5, verse 14, he says, "This is the confidence that we have before him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us in whatever we ask, we know that we have the request that we have asked of him." So the very first thing Jesus says is come to a place of submission to God's will. And that submission to God's will actually give you a huge amount of faith and confidence in your prayer, because you know that you'll be asking for the things that God also desires, that God is working towards anyway. There's this understanding in the book of Proverbs there where, as he's teaching people about pursuing our own desires, he talks about how God is ultimately in control of everything anyway. And it is a foolish person who plans their desires against the will of God. Listen to this verse in Proverbs in chapter 16 and verse 9. "The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps." Now, do you want your life to be a life that's lived according to your desires, according to your wisdom, and according to your plans? Or would you much rather entrust your life to God, who has so much better plans for you? Plus, when you do that, you know that you're praying along with God's desires rather than feeling you're not sure if God desires. And that will really lift your faith. So as you go to prayer today, first begin with thanksgiving. But then second, as you step into the presence of God and as you remember his goodness, spend some time bringing your heart, bringing your thoughts, bringing your desires into submission to him, and pray, really pray, your will be done. That will give you a great cleansing, a great refreshing of heart, and then you'll be much more confident in the things that you pray for. So pray these things today. Make sure you spend some time, in a sense, submitting to God's will and knowing that that is good for everyone. God bless you, and we'll see you tomorrow for Devotions with Pastor Joe.